When people think about imperialism in Africa, I believe the image is often clear and historical. They imagine European powers arriving on the continent, they're drawing borders, extracting resources, and they are imposing foreign systems of governance onto Africans. It is always something that is associated with the past, imperialism, I mean, and it's something that is always done to Africa. And I do believe that that view is important. However, I think it's incomplete because imperialism did not disappear when colonial rule ended. It changed form. Today, some of its most powerful expressions are quieter, more subtle, and at times enacted by Africans ourselves. This is what we might call cultural imperialism. It is the internalization and production of values, standards, and hierarchies that were originally imposed from the outside. These forms of imperialism are not enforced through armies or laws alone, but through everyday choices, its social expectations, and beliefs about what is quote unquote acceptable, what is quote unquote civilized, or what is quote unquote normal. They show up in how people present themselves, how they worship, and even how they relate to one another. Religion is another space where I believe cultural imperialism continues to operate in complex ways. And I'm going to talk about Christianity and Islam because they are the most dominant in our countries and have long histories in Africa. And for many people, they are deeply meaningful parts of identity and community. However, the forms that these religions often take today, particularly in their more fundamentalist expressions, can reflect values that were shaped or intensified through colonial encounters. Missionary activities during colonial rule did more than spread religion. It also introduced specific moral frameworks, many of which positioned African cultural practices as inferior, sinful, or even backward. Over time, some of these ideas became internalized. Today, this can be seen in strict interpretations of religion that reject or suppress indigenous beliefs, languages, and traditions. Practices that were once part of local cultures may now be labeled as unholy or uncivilized, not necessarily because they are inherently harmful, but because they did not align with the imported religious norms. In some cases, religious fundamentalism also reinforces rigid social hierarchies, particularly around gender and sexuality. Ideas about what is quote unquote moral or what is quote unquote acceptable can be tied to interpretations that originated outside the continent but are now defended as absolute truths within it. This creates a tension where while religion can be a source of comfort and community, it can also act as a vehicle through which external value systems continue to shape internal realities. One of the most visible forms of cultural imperialism in Africa today is found in respectability politics. It is the idea that in order for you to be taken seriously or to be treated with dignity, you must conform to certain standards of behavior and appearance. And as a black woman, as a black African woman, I can say that one of the biggest examples of this is hair, particularly for black women. And this has become a central site of this kind of tension because across many societies, African societies to be exact, natural African hair textures like afros, braids, locks are often still seen as unprofessional. They're seen as untidy or even inappropriate in formal spaces like schools and workplaces. So straightened hair or wigs or even weaves, which more closely align to Eurocentric beauty standards, are frequently considered as more acceptable. And I do think this is not a neutral preference. It reflects a long history in which African features are devalued and European features are elevated. During colonial rule, proximity to European norms often meant access to education, employment, and social mobility. Over time, these standards became deeply embedded to the point where they are now often enforced within African communities themselves. It's us enacting it upon ourselves and our society at large. And I do believe what I'm talking about here can be closely aligned with the work of Ngungi wa Thiong'o, who argued that imperialism's most long-lasting impact is not political control, but mental dominion. In Decolonizing the Mind, he writes, the biggest weapon yielded and actually daily unleashed by imperialism is the cultural bomb. By this, Ngungi wa Thiong'o refers to the way colonial systems eroded people's beliefs in their own languages, identities, and cultural practices. This idea is especially visible in respectability politics and religious fundamentalism, where African ways of being are often dismissed or reshaped to fit external standards. When natural hair is seen as unprofessional or indigenous beliefs are labeled backward, the cultural bomb is still at work, not through force, but through internalized judgment. Ngungi wa Thiong'o's work helps us understand that these everyday preferences and beliefs are not neutral at all. They are part of a longer history of cultural displacement that continues to shape how value is assigned within our own African societies. Perhaps one of the most painful expressions of internalized imperialism is found in xenophobia, Afrophobia, and tribalism, which is the suspicion, hostility, or violence directed at those perceived as quote unquote other, even within the African continent. Yeah, doesn't make sense, does it? Colonial powers drew borders across Africa with little regard for existing cultural, ethnic, or linguistic realities. Communities that had long histories of interaction were separated, while others were grouped together under single national identities. These divisions did not disappear after independence. In many cases, they were reinforced through political systems that favored certain groups over others. Today, this history can manifest in tensions between nationalities or ethnic groups. Migrants from neighboring countries may face discrimination or violence. Within countries, tribal identities can become sources of conflict rather than diversity. And I believe what makes this form of imperialism particularly striking is that it mirrors the logic of the colonial rule, which is divide, categorize, and rank. It's the hierarchies. Remember the hierarchies? Yeah. Instead of a unified sense of shared identity, differences are emphasized and weaponized. People are seen as outsiders, competitors, or even threats, rather than as part of a broader collective. In this sense, xenophobia, Afrophobia, and tribalism can be understood as the afterlives of imperial structures, the systems that continue to shape how people see one another, even in the absence of direct colonial rule. Now, we are the colonizers. Yeah. Recognizing internalized forms of imperialism is not about blaming individuals. I don't think it is. Or it's not even about suggesting that Africans are responsible for the legacy of colonialism. I do believe the historical context matters. These systems were imposed over long periods of time and have long lasting effects that are still impacting us till this day. Similarly, Franz Fanon provides a powerful framework for understanding xenophobia and internal division in post colonial societies. In his book, Black Skin, White Masks, he explores how colonized people come to internalize the values of the colonizer, often measuring themselves and others against those standards. Fanon writes the colonizer is elevated above his jungle status in proportion to his adoption of the mother country's cultural standards. This hierarchy does not disappear after independence. Instead, it can be redirected inward, shaping how people perceive and treat one another. In The Rest of the Earth, he further warns that without deep structural change, post-colonial societies risk reproducing the same patterns of exclusion and violence that defined colonial rule. Xenophobia, Afrophobia, and tribalism can thus be seen not simply as social tensions, but as symptoms of deeper psychological and structural legacy, one where divisions are maintained even in the absence of the original colonizer. So let me say this again. Imperialism is often imagined as something that is visible and external. We imagine an empire that arrives, occupies, and controls. But sometimes, really, it's just us, because imperialism in its most enduring forms is often less obvious. It's you saying to your friend, "When are you going to get your hair done?" It's you suggesting that maybe if you talk like this, you might get the job. It's you saying, hey, maybe if she dresses better, she might get more respect. I do think that when we understand these quieter forms of imperialism, it doesn't erase the past, it doesn't erase the systems that came before, but I think it changes how we see the present, and it reveals that power is not only something imposed from the outside, we hold the power. And perhaps more importantly, it suggests that change too can begin from within. And the everyday choices, the conversations, and the values that shape how people see themselves and see each other.